Hello, and welcome to MagicMingle. On this channel, we bring classic stories to life in modern English, helping you improve your language skills while enjoying timeless literature. Whether you're here to practice English or simply love a good story, you're in the right place. Today, we're exploring Anton Chekhov's reflective story, The Student. In this tale, we follow Ivan, a young seminary student, as he walks home on a chilly Good Friday evening, feeling the harshness of life weighing down on him. Along the way, he stops by a campfire where two widows, Vasilisa and her daughter Lukerya, are warming themselves. Ivan shares with them the story of the Apostle Peter's denial of Jesus, a moment from the Gospels. The widows' emotional reactions reveal how deeply they connect with the story, and Ivan realizes that past and present are linked by universal feelings of sorrow, regret, and empathy. Here's a quick summary of the story. Ivan, feeling discouraged by life's hardships, reflects on Peter's painful denial of Jesus and shares the story with two widows. Their response reveals the powerful way that stories and experiences connect us across time. Inspired, Ivan realizes that despite life's struggles, there is a beautiful, unbroken connection between all people and all times. In this retelling, we've modernized the language to make it easier for English learners, while keeping Chekhov's original message and themes intact. The evening started out calm and pleasant. Thrushes called to one another, and a soft droning echoed across the nearby swamp, sounding like a gentle whistle through an empty bottle. A snipe flew past, and the shot fired at it resonated cheerfully in the spring air. But as darkness crept over the forest, a sharp, cold wind suddenly blew in from the east, chilling everything in its path. The forest fell silent, and thin sheets of ice stretched across the pools. It felt bleak, empty, and isolated in the growing cold, a hint of winter lingering in the air. Ivan Velikopolsky, a student at a clerical academy and the son of a sacristan, was walking home along the path that bordered the marshy meadows. He had gone out hunting earlier, and now his fingers were numb, while his face burned from the harsh wind. He felt as if the cold snap had thrown everything out of balance, disrupting the natural harmony of the world. The evening seemed to be falling faster than usual, and a sense of unease settled over him. All around him, the landscape was deserted and eerily gloomy. The only light in the distance came from a small fire in the widow's gardens by the river. The village was over 3 miles away, shrouded in the mist of a chilly evening. As he trudged along, Ivan thought about his family at home. He had left them earlier that day, with his mother sitting barefoot on the floor, scrubbing the samovar, and his father lying on the stove coughing. Because it was Good Friday, they hadn't prepared any food, and now Ivan was feeling intensely hungry. Huddled against the cold, he mused that this same bitter wind must have blown in the days of Rurik, Ivan the Terrible, and Peter the Great. Back then, people had endured the same biting cold, the same poverty, hunger, and hardship, living under thatched roofs full of holes. And here they were, centuries later, in the same desolation, darkness, and struggle. It felt as if life had changed very little over the last 1,000 years, and he dreaded going home. The gardens by the river were known as the Widow's Gardens because they were tended by two widows, a mother and her daughter. A campfire burned brightly, crackling as it cast light over the freshly plowed soil. The older widow, Vasilisa, a tall, plump woman wearing a man's coat, stood by the fire, gazing thoughtfully into the flames. Her daughter, Lukerya, a small, pockmarked woman with a distant look on her face, sat on the ground, washing a pot and some spoons. It appeared they had just finished supper. In the distance, Ivan could hear the voices of men leading their horses to the river for water. "Winter's come back again, it seems," Ivan said as he approached the fire. "Good evening." Vasilisa started slightly but quickly recognized him. Smiling warmly, she said, "I didn't know it was you." "God bless you, Ivan. May you be prosperous." They exchanged a few words. Vasilisa, who had once worked as a wet nurse and then a children's nurse in a wealthy household, spoke with a certain grace. A gentle smile rarely left her face. Her daughter, Lukerya, had been beaten by her husband and now lived with a look of quiet resignation. She squinted at Ivan, not saying a word, her expression resembling that of a person who could neither hear nor speak. At a fire just like this, the Apostle Peter warmed himself once, Ivan said, stretching his hands toward the flames. It must have been just as cold that night. What a terrible, long night it must have been, don't you think? He glanced around at the surrounding darkness, shook his head, and then asked, "You've heard the reading about the 12 apostles, haven't you?" "Yes, I have," Vasilisa replied. "Then you remember how, at the Last Supper, Peter told Jesus, 'I am ready to go with you into the darkest depths, even to death.' And Jesus replied, 'I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times. After supper, Jesus went to the garden, overwhelmed by the fear of what lay ahead, and prayed. Poor Peter, exhausted in body and spirit, struggled to stay awake but fell asleep. Later, that same night, Judas kissed Jesus, betraying him to his enemies. They arrested him and brought him to the high priest's house, where they beat him. Peter, half asleep, fearful and anxious, followed from a distance, not fully grasping the horror that was unfolding. You know, he loved Jesus intensely. And as he watched from afar, he saw them beating Jesus. Lukerya stopped washing the spoons and stared at Ivan, her gaze fixed. They led Jesus to the high priest, Ivan continued. It was cold, so the workers built a fire in the yard and warmed themselves. Peter joined them by the fire, just as I'm doing now. A woman nearby saw him and said, "This man was with Jesus too." In that moment, Peter was terrified of being arrested as well, so he denied knowing Jesus. A little while later, another person recognized him as a follower of Jesus and said, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" But again, Peter denied it. For a third time someone said, "I'm sure I saw you with him in the garden earlier." And for the third time, Peter denied it. Just then, the rooster crowed, and Peter remembered Jesus's words from earlier that night. Realizing what he had done, he left the courtyard and wept bitterly. The Gospel says, he went out and wept bitterly. I can picture it, the quiet, dark garden, the faint sounds of stifled sobbing in the stillness. Ivan fell silent, lost in thought. Vasilisa's gentle smile remained, but her face softened, and suddenly, big tears rolled down her cheeks. She covered her face with her sleeve, as if embarrassed by her tears. Lukerya, too, had been listening intently, her face flushed, her expression strained as if she were enduring some deep pain. The men who had been watering their horses returned from the river, and one of them rode close by, the firelight flickering over him. Ivan bid the two women good night and continued on his way. Darkness surrounded him again, and his fingers grew numb once more. The sharp wind made him feel like winter had truly returned, even though Easter was just 2 days away. As he walked, Ivan thought about Vasilisa. Her tears made him realize that the events of that night, centuries ago, held some deeper meaning for her. Somehow, Peter's denial and his regret had touched her heart directly. Looking back, Ivan saw the lone campfire glowing in the darkness, now without any figures beside it. His thoughts turned again to Vasilisa. If she had cried and Lukerya had been so affected, then the story he had told, the story of Peter's anguish and guilt, was somehow connected to the present, to these two women, to the lonely village and to himself. Vasilisa hadn't wept because Ivan was a good storyteller. She wept because Peter's struggle and suffering resonated with her own life, her own experience. In her heart, she had felt what Peter must have felt. A sudden joy filled Ivan's heart, and he paused, breathing deeply. The past, he thought, is connected to the present by an unbroken chain of events, one leading to the next. It felt as though he had seen both ends of this chain, as if by touching one end, he had set the other quivering. When he crossed the river by the ferryboat and climbed the hill toward his village, he looked westward, where the cold crimson sunset lingered in a thin line on the horizon. He thought of the truth and beauty that had shaped humanity since the days of Peter and Jesus. This truth had guided lives through every century, leading people forward. It had endured, even to this day, as the central thread in all human life and all earthly existence. With this thought, a sense of youth and strength surged within him. He was only 22, and he felt the sweet anticipation of a happiness yet unknown, a mysterious joy waiting for him somewhere in the future. To Ivan, life seemed wonderful, full of wonder and meaning, deeply connected across time.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, and share our channel Magic Mingle with your friends to enjoy more magical stories.